Anyway, I'll get some better shots outside. Let's move on to deal with this Finn M91 barrel, because this thing's going to take us a while. And that covered touch-up. And this next video, it's, I'm going to warn you guys, it's likely going to be at least 2 parts, because it's going to take a while. It's kind of involved when you start doing a whole barreled action like this. You have to be a lot more meticulous with the metal prep, and you have to be very careful to get the color blended in right and everything like that. So let's get started. Alright, we've got this Finn M91 barreled action clamped in our vise here. I've got the receiver clamped in and padded well, and then we got our barrel poking out. Now it doesn't have to be clamped down tight, because all you're doing is sanding on it. Now I'll move the camera in here in a second and show you close up what I'm doing. But just bear in mind, I don't have a cameraman, so I kind of have to just fly by the seat of my pants. Tear off a strip of sandpaper, 240. What I do is I take this Croil and just run a bead of it and let it flow down the paper like that. Hopefully you can see. Alright, and all we're going to do is we're just going to go over this barrel, and we're going to try to polish it up some. Purpose of doing this is to remove surface rust, finish. I mean, you're basically just trying to bring out the luster of the metal. Typically with a blued finish, the more polished the metal is, the more of a luster you're going to get out of it. That is generally accepted as being the standard for bluing. Now there are some types of blued finishes where if you're going for more of a matte colored blue finish, like you typically will get out of maybe a rust blued finish, you might try to get the metal just a little bit more matte. There are some people that will sandblast their metal parts with glass beads and things like that to give it kind of a satin look, and then follow up with bluing. I mean, that's perfectly acceptable too, just depending on what you're wanting to get. In the case of this Finn rifle here, we're trying to get as close to the original military finish as possible without having to go to a hot blue. We are talking about getting set up to do hot bluing, but we're kind of trying to, sort out in our minds if that's the right thing to do or not, because it does require a lot of equipment, and there's a lot of safety concerns. You got to have good ventilation. I mean, typically the only people that do hot bluing nowadays are factories and very well established gunsmiths. I'm kind of a, I guess technically a amateur level gunsmith, so I don't really have the budget necessary to set that stuff up properly just yet. So that's one of the things that to think about. Cold bluing is a good option if you don't have access to hot bluing. I'm gonna tear off another strip. I'm gonna move the camera in and show you what I'm doing up close. All right, there's what we just did. Not bad for just the amount of time it took me to do it. Now, just to show you a comparison, this is what we just did. Here's what we're about to do. See the difference? It just looks like hell. So I'll show you real quick here. I don't want this video to be ultra long, but at the same time it tends to be kind of a trade-off, because I can make the video short and sweet, but then some of you, may not really see it the way you really need to see it. I'm a visual learner, and I like seeing things done. So in my mind, if I have to watch 10 minutes, extra worth of footage, all the better. Just going over it, try to keep it as even as possible. But ultimately, all you're doing is, removing the old finish and all surface rust, and you're ultimately also trying to smooth out any little pits. If the pits aren't real deep, then this will smoothen them out enough to where you probably won't even notice them at all. If you have a buffer wheel on your bench grinder, you can use that also. I know I've used them quite a bit in the past. One thing that I will say, that with the Oxford blue, they don't tend to work quite as well as this method does, because this method actually leaves the metal just a slightly roughed up, and this Oxpho blue tends to really get in the pores of the metal well. And before we actually apply the bluing to this barreled action, we're going to use some hair dryer to generate some heat, and that'll open up the pores in the metal a little bit and really help it take that bluing in. You can use a heat gun like a mechanic would use, that's fine too. But heck, a hair dryer is just as fine. I mean, don't go out of your way to buy a heat gun if all you got is a hair dryer. A heat gun will provide more heat, but it's not necessary. You can also use, I suppose, a propane torch or acetylene torch. Put a little bit of heat on it that way, but I really wouldn't suggest that because that's a lot of heat in one area. Just take your time and use a hair dryer or a heat gun and get, you know, build up enough heat to where it's uncomfortable to touch. Okay, we got our barrel polished up and in the white, as you can see here. I have to say so myself, I think it looks pretty good. Anyway, we're going to move on to the rest over here. I didn't take the sight off. I'm just going to clean around the sight. The rear sight's pretty much in the white for the most part, so it's going to blue just fine as long as we rough it up. Anyway, let me, I'm going to zoom in a little bit and I'll start sanding this area. I probably won't get too much more of this on tape because I mean, I think you guys see the basic concept of what I'm trying to do here. So I'm not going to bore you guys with unnecessary details. But essentially, tear you off a scrap of paper, little oil. Nice thing about running the Croil too is that it doesn't foul up your grit quite as bad, you know, as it would if you're running it dry. And two, the oil works its way into the metal and helps protect it while you're finishing the rest. Because if you were to just, you know, sand all this off dry, chances are it probably rust on you. So that's one benefit of having the oil on there. I always like to pay special attention to the receiver and the barrel because, you know, when your customer picks up the rifle, the first thing they're going to see is all the markings, the crest. So you want to make sure that's prepared really well. You want it to look nice. Now, that's not to say that, you know, the area under the barrel that goes under the stock isn't going to look as good. It's not that. It's just that you want this area to pop. You know, you want it to look really good. I'm going to go through and I'm going to finish this metal prep, and we're going to go on to actually bluing this thing up. I've got the stock done, and if I do say so myself, the stock looks really nice. I don't have all the hardware done just yet, but as soon as we're done with this project and get the bluing done, I'll put it together and just set it inside the stock and take it out in the sun and show you what it all looks like together. I've probably got about, at this point, I probably got an hour and a half in this metal prep, okay? So, you know, it's not gonna, definitely not gonna be just a real quick thing. You know, it's gonna take you a while to get the metal right. I'm gonna take a little alcohol and go over this just to degrease. And notice I'm not wearing gloves. It's because we're degreasing, so, you know, we're not really ultra worried about getting any oils on there, ultimately, because we're removing the oil with the cloth, whatever's on there. A little bit of residue from our polish, or well, our oil, okay? But we're basically just degreasing this thing as best we can. We're going to give plenty of time for that remaining alcohol to evaporate. Now, if you're using something like acetone, which is probably going to be your preferred method of degreasing anyway, if you're using something like acetone, it's going to evaporate really quick. Denatured alcohol will evaporate relatively quick. Something like isopropyl is going to take a little longer to evaporate, but it will. Alright, I'm going to have some lunch and we'll come back and finish this thing up. Alright, let's go for this little section here ahead of, right here that we just heated up. You know, and you might have to work kind of quickly because you want the metal hot. You know, you can go in small steps. It doesn't have to be fancy.